Hi, everybody. We're going to take just another moment or so and let others filter in, and then we'll get started. See, Bobby's a pro. He knows how to make his little emoji work. Let me tell everybody here a story about something I did like a month ago that was wonderfully embarrassing. I was in a meeting like this with like 40 participants. And I didn't know it, but I tried to do a little reaction to be all official and act like I knew what I was doing. Well, my little reaction just kept going and going and going. And finally, the person speaking had to pause and say, excuse me, Risha, did you have something you wanted to say? And I had to unmute and say, no, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why it's doing that. So that's my story for today. So good job, Bobby. I was like, I'm not as fancy as I appear. Let's see here. All righty. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Taylor, you are a man who doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway, okay?
All righty.
So, for those of you who don't know who Taylor is, Taylor describes himself, and I want you to know, by the way, I haven't told you this, Taylor, but I think this is such a fantastic description, as an accessibility evangelist. That is a fantastic moniker. Great job choosing a definition for yourself. Taylor undoubtedly will tell us right now that he had a life experience that caused him to truly become an accessibility evangelist. He's become a man on a mission. He's passionate about not only striving for accessibility in the workplace, but I'm going to take his words again, which I thought this was so beautiful. He said, I'm passionate about accessibility beyond compliance. It's about real inclusion. And so I think we're probably all aware that there are compliance laws and there's compliance that workplaces should strive for. But what is accessibility beyond compliance? And that's what I'm really eager to hear about. And I think we're hearing from someone who not only has learned about this professionally and is passionate about it professionally, but Taylor has a personal side to this topic as well. So Taylor, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna share my presentation if I can get it to work. There we go. Oh, can you all see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
All right, wonderful. All right, so today talking about accessibility in the workplace, and I talk about a lot of different stuff with accessibility, and it was interesting you brought up compliance, because usually when I think of compliance, I think like products and services and like physical environments and digital ones, but when it comes to the workplace, there aren't really like guidelines that you can follow. So it's more so you just kind of to learn, make mistakes, and learn from them as you go. So hopefully, I'll give you some advice on kind of alleviating those mistakes and kind of getting out in front of them. But before I get to accessibility, I'm going to talk about what it is, why it's important, and then talk about some of the benefits. Because I made the mistake one time of not giving it a proper definition when I started, and someone at the end said, "I really enjoyed your session, but I don't know, I've never heard of accessibility, so I felt kind of lost." And I felt terrible because I was talking about inclusion. Yet I told like they were totally lost on the topic because I just assumed everyone knew it, at least everyone who attended that session. So for every session there on out, I always give the definition I like to use. So I'll do that, and I'd also like to hear from y'all if you feel like being interactive. If not, don't worry about it at all. But if you do put anything in chat, I am visually impaired, so I'd appreciate if Risha kept an eye on chat for me.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm doing. Yep.
All right, sweet. And also, I was telling Risha and Kristen I'm getting over being sick, so my throat's a little raspy. So apologies if I take small breaks like this to get a sip of tea. All right, hopefully, yeah, it seemed like it helped a little bit. All right, so with that, I'll move on. Just quick introduction into who I am. I think Risha, that was a wonderful introduction. But yeah, I do think myself as an accessibility evangelist. That'd be a position that would be great to have. Right now, it's just what I call myself. It's basically meaning I'm an advocate for disabilities, for people with disabilities and accessibility. And I love to create educational content around both of them, share best practices around accessibility, all that kind of stuff. But I have some of my personal interests up here, like Braves baseball. I love to sing, ballroom dancing, jujitsu, mixology, all those kinds of things. And I'm always looking for a new hobby. So if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear it. And I also have a QR code to my LinkedIn if you want to connect with me there. And on the right-hand side is a picture of me giving my Great Dane Maverick a bath. I'm smiling. He is not. He seems like he's having an awful time, but at least he's well behaved because if he weren't, then he just would not get baths. He is 130 pounds, so he doesn't do what he doesn't want. So I'm glad he's at least cooperative with that. So first, going to talk about what accessibility is. So I hide my definition because first I like to hear from the audience what accessibility means to you, and it can be a few words. And if you don't feel like being interactive right now, that's totally fine too. But I'll give a moment for people to tell me what accessibility means to them. I'll take this moment to get a sip.
Taylor, I think my definition of accessibility is giving accommodations to those who may need it.
Yeah, that's certainly a great part of it. And what's interesting about accessibility, it's so broad that there are so many different definitions you can give and so many different ones that apply. Like that certainly applies. There are so many other different answers that you can give. That's why I always like to share the one I like to use, so we're kind of on the same page. Did
And
something else come in chat?
yeah, Taylor, I was going to say, Bobby said, keeping all people in mind when approaching an interaction.
That's also very good. All right, so I'll show you the definition I like to use. So accessibility refers to the design and provision of products, services, environments, and information that can be easily accessed, understood, and used by everyone, especially those with disabilities. And like as I was saying, it's a very broad topic, but that's why I like using this definition because I feel it is very encompassing of what accessibility is. So like when you first read it, it may sound very complex, and that's because it is. But I like to just emphasize how broad the topic really is and how there are so many different ways you can approach accessibility. So everything you all were saying was right on the money. But I just like to share the one I like to use. And I highlight the word everyone because there's a very common misconception that accessibility is just to help those with disabilities. And I also when don't like for people to think that accessibility is to give an unfair advantage. And me and a couple of people on our meetup group addressed this last week. Accessibility is not about giving an unfair advantage. It's more about leveling the playing field and giving equal opportunities to all. So like Kristen was saying, giving accommodations, those accommodations aren't going to be given to people to try and get them to be even better than average worker. It's trying to just help fill the gaps where they need assistance. But I do love to always point out that accessibility truly can help everyone. And so why is it important? So according to the World Health Organization, about 1.3 billion people in the world have a disability, and that's around 1 in 6. So there's a very good chance that there are many people at your company or clients or family and friends that have disabilities. They're very common. And it is the world's largest demographic, so be kind of ignorant on our parts not to consider them when we're considering being inclusive. And I use the World Health Organization and the NIH, National Institute of Health, where I get most of my statistics. So if you, and on this one, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. So if you see any stats, those are usually where they come from. But as of 2025, around 38.3% of Americans with disabilities were employed. And this number has been increasing every year since it began being recorded in 2008. And I think I've been referring to this statistic for 5 or 6 years. And when I first started, it was, I think, 19.1. So it has grown exponentially and it's been consistently growing by almost 2% every year. And I think a good reason for that is the larger number of remote positions becoming available, especially after COVID. I saw a major spike after 2020 in the stat. But this just shows the importance of keeping in mind accessibility in the workplace because more and more people with disabilities are getting into the workforce. And of that percentage, about half of them have not disclosed their disability to their employer, which I actually felt was kind of high. I think the actual percentage was like 40, like high 40s. But I found that kind of interesting. I thought it was a little high because I know a lot of people who choose not to disclose their disability, even to like their coworkers, let alone their employer. So just found that very interesting. And also, many disabilities are not visible when you first interact or see someone. And that's part of the reason a lot of people choose not to disclose they have one because it's not visible, so they don't want to feel like they're being treated differently or where they're missing out on any opportunities or anything like that. And that's part of the reason I do what I do, because I'm at a point now where I'm very comfortable talking about my disability and advocating for others. So I like to take that up, like take advantage of the fact that I'm comfortable with it so I can be a voice to those who aren't very comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, Taylor, you're getting some positive affirmations here. I think there's a lot of agreement about how important that aspect is.
Absolutely. And this is a statistic I recently learned that's about 70 to 80% of disabilities are hidden. And you'll hear hidden disability or invisible disability. They're the same thing, it's just preference. Like, for example, I myself have cortical blindness, but if anyone who doesn't know me first interacts with me, they most likely would not be able to tell right away. I mean, after a while, they may notice I may not be making the best eye contact or have an issue navigating physical environments. But there's the vast majority of disabilities are hidden. So, like, even physical disabilities, there's a lot of hidden physical disabilities. Hearing, like auditory disabilities, like partial deafness and full deafness, visual disabilities, mental disabilities, and cognitive ones, and learning disabilities. There's so many different disabilities, and a large majority of them are hidden. So this just shows that you can never assume that you know someone's situation. Even if you feel like you know them pretty well, sometimes it takes people years to feel comfortable to be open about it, if at all. So you can never just think you can assume that, oh, I've known this person for a while. They don't need any accommodation, or I don't need to keep that in mind when I'm talking to them or developing a product for them or anything like that. All right, so now talk about a little bit of the benefits of accessibility. So I split them up in a couple groups, internal benefits as well as external benefits to your company. So internally, I feel like some of these are a bit self-explanatory or obvious, but if you have accessibility in your organization, you're certainly going to have higher morale for those disability or those employees with disabilities. But you're also going to have a lot higher efficiency and productivity from those employees. I can speak from personal experience. And when I was in position and I didn't have the accommodations, it was really hard for me to get the work done in the amount of time I was supposed to. But once I received the accommodations, it was much easier for me to get things done in the appropriate amount of time. And so, and a lot of accommodations are fairly simple, like just giving ample like time to finish a task or giving people materials ahead of time, like giving them materials half hour before the meeting so they can prepare. Because some people may have to use a screen reader to be able to read the document, so they can't do that while being on the call, but they could do that ahead of time before the call so they feel more prepared come time for the meeting. So even something just as simple as that can really increase productivity and efficiency of employees. But not only that, you can attract a lot of great talent to your organization. So as I said, there are about 1.3 billion people with disabilities in the world. And I personally know tons of people with disabilities who are fantastic at what they do. But like me, I know they value accessibility and they value companies that prioritize it. So if I'm looking for a position or any other person with a disability is looking for a company to work at, and they see this company is would be a great fit, but then they look at their culture and they do not feel like they're respected or being accommodated or even feel respected or whatever it may be, then you could be driving away a lot of great candidates to your company by having a lack of accessibility. But not only can you attract good talent, you can also retain it by having accessibility. And again, I can speak on this from personal experience. When I'm at a company that is providing me with accommodations that I need, and they're very supportive of accessibility and what I'm trying to do, and just trying to be more inclusive as a whole, that's company I and probably a lot of people with disabilities would be more likely to stay at. And also, since disabilities affect so many people, even if a candidate doesn't have a disability, there is a very good chance someone they're very close to does. And so even they don't have a disability doesn't mean they don't value it. So that's also good to keep in mind.
Taylor, if you don't mind, I just have a quick comment on that.
Yeah, go
Um,
ahead.
that's something I think it's common knowledge within most industries that it's better and more efficient to retain the talent you have than to try to attract new talent. And so that said, I think that retention piece is really important. I think when a company offers accommodations and offers accessibility, they are showing loyalty and care to their employees. And in return, those employees are often going to be loyal to their company. And it does, in fact, increase morale and the culture improves. And so I think that's a really, really important piece for that internal benefit.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that applies also just to interpersonal relationships. Like, for example, did I see Bobby Small was on the call?
He is, yep.
Yeah. So like he's an example of someone who's been very accommodating to me, and anytime we interact, he's always asking how he can be more accessible to me, but also he asked my advice on how to be more accessible to others. And so
That's
like
fantastic.
just having people like that, even though that's not a work relationship, that still forms a really good connection with with these people by by showing that care. Because
Indeed.
there's a lot of accessibility principles that are a bit more complex and difficult to enact, but there's a lot of very simple things you can do. And one of the simplest things is to ask. And so that's why I love when people like Bobby and others ask how they can make their interactions or their workplaces more accommodating and more accessible. And what's great about a lot of these things is they don't only apply to people with disabilities, because I always talk about accessibility and inclusion kind of as one. Because a lot of stuff that I talk about can be repurposed to help make sure you're more inclusive towards people part of the LGBTQ group or women in the workplace or immigrants. And so that's why I love talking about accessibility and inclusion, because I feel like a lot of the topics I talk about can be repurposed to help in different ways.
Absolutely. And just so you know, Bobby gave you some love. Nice little heart.
But when it comes to external benefits, I usually again, there is so many benefits to accessibility, but I could fill a whole session on that. So I kind of whittled it down to the favorite talking points of mine. So for external benefits, I broke down into ethical, legal, and financial. So an ethical reason, or looking at it from an ethical perspective, accessibility is just the right thing to do to be more inclusive. Because who doesn't want to feel included, whether you have disability or not? And that's a perspective I would love most companies to have when it comes to accessibility. But sometimes that can't be enough because there is still a massive misconception that accessibility is an expense, and it's something that companies view as, oh, we don't really have the budget for that. I don't know if it's worth it, that kind of stuff. So they're not always going to be doing it for an ethical reason, but that's why it's also good to have other reasons you can give as well, like a legal one or a financial one. So again, ethical is the ideal reason to consider it, but if you're trying to convince someone they're not feeling that, you can always go with a legal or financial perspective. So with the legal perspective, like here in the US, we have things like the ADA or Americans with Disabilities Act. We have Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. In Europe, they have, I believe, EN 301549. And also they have the European Accessibility Act, which is going into effect on June 28th of this year, which is pretty exciting. And a lot of companies are scrambling because they were procrastinating, and then they're like, oh darn, it's here, and they're not quite ready. And so there's that in Europe, and there's stuff in Japan, Australia, parts of Canada, and all over the globe. Because again, this is 1.3 billion people globally, so this is a global issue. And so you have laws and regulations all across the world. And so if you're not prioritizing accessibility when it comes to your products or services, you're leaving yourself open to legal risk. And there's been dozens of major companies who have lost big lawsuits pertaining to a lack of accessibility. Like companies like Netflix lost one with the National Deaf National Deaf Foundation. And that's why if you go on Netflix now, every piece of content has captions. That's only that way because of that lawsuit. And so that's also a very interesting thing to think about. A lot of great things have come because of lawsuits. A lot of accessibility in both in the digital and physical environment have come from those lawsuits. But other companies like I believe Bank of America is one, Domino's is one, Target settled like a $6 million lawsuit. And there's a list of like dozens of other like big companies. And so if you're not prioritizing it, you're leaving yourself open to massive risk in that area. But then this is probably my favorite reason to talk about it as a from the financial perspective. So here in the US alone, people with disabilities have around $500 billion worth of disposable income. Now, this is a massive client base your company could be missing out on due to a lack of accessibility. For example, about a year ago, I started doing jujitsu, and there were a couple of gyms in my area I was looking into. And so I was doing research on their websites, trying to decide which one to try out. And the first one had better ratings, not by much, but better ratings. But their website was not compatible with my screen reader, and I tried 3 different ones, and nothing was working very well. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll try the other one. And theirs worked with all my screen readers. So I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna try this place out because they seem like if I go to the other one, I'm like, I'm gonna be thinking, all right, they didn't care about being inclusive on their website. Are they really gonna worry about being inclusive when I'm there in person? So that's something that I take very seriously, and I'm sure a lot of people with disabilities like me think the same way when they're looking into different companies to do business with. So even if you are a really good company, if you don't have these things that you're offering and you have companies that value it and they see that you don't offer that, they may not come to you because they may think, all right, well, I know that's a really good company, but this other company values it and can do what we want. So we're going to take our business there. And again, that 500 billion is just in the US. So if you think about worldwide, that's easily in the trillions. So if it'd be a little silly to disregard this massive client base. It could be very financially irresponsible even. And that's probably my favorite one to talk about because it just blows my mind about the power of a demographic like people with disabilities can have on the economy. All right, so now I'm going to get a little bit more to the tips on creating a more inclusive workplace. And so let me check on time. How are we doing?
You're doing good. Looks like you've got 17 minutes left.
All right, sweet, not bad. All right, so the importance of working from the top down, I can certainly speak to this on a personal experience. It's been very hard for me as a lower level employee to enact change throughout a company when I don't really have much say in what goes on. And so I can do my best and try and be an advocate from the bottom, but it's a lot harder. But if you have people in leadership who are supportive, and who are enacting different policies on inclusion and so maybe even just supporting your efforts or my efforts on or whoever it is on being more accessible and inclusive, then that process can be much easier. Because I'm sure most people in here have experienced this in a similar way, maybe not specifically with accessibility, but with other issues in the workplace. It's much easier to have change happen from the top down, have it trickle throughout the company.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important piece too, because culture, I think we all know culture is everything in any given company. It's why people leave, it's why they stay, it's success, it's why they fail. And you're right, so often culture is most successful when it is positive change from top down. So that is very, very important.
Yeah, not only is it easier to attain that change, it's easier to maintain it. Because
Yep.
if you're able to make some change to the company, it may help for a little while, but it's not going to last very long if it doesn't have support from leadership. And this could be company-wide, like be the executives, or it could even be specific to a certain team, like the project manager. So it just kind of depends, and a lot of times it helps if you have someone that you can like reach out to in the company, or even like on YouTube, there's a lot of educational content that you can look up and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So just so you know, we do have a couple questions for the end. So at the very end, we'll be ready to have you answer some great questions.
All right, yeah,
So keep going.
absolutely. I love questions, so keep coming.
Yep,
And
yep, for sure.
yeah, no, a mosquito flying in front of me. But even if we don't have time for all of them, I'd still love to take a look at them. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and ask anything directly, that'd be great too. So some of you may have been thinking like this all sounds great, especially like working from the top down, all these tips, but how do we get started? And there's something called the accessibility maturity model. And this is a very broad topic, and it's got a lot of different moving pieces, but I always think of it as an accessibility roadmap for your company. So it's something you can refer to see where you've been in terms of accessibility, how you got there, where you are now, and where you want to go in the future, and how you can get there. So it's a lot to take on, and I vastly condensed it into these 8 points here. And there's a lot of different accessibility maturity models out there. I personally developed my own off of like three different ones I've seen. I think this one is from the W3C or the World Wide Web Consortium. But I think companies like DQ Systems and the IAP think they have their own. So, and you can even develop your own, but you certainly need some accessibility knowledge help, especially in the earlier stages. But also, I'm not going to go through this because it's a very dense topic. But I think it's very interesting to point out again the importance of uh, leadership getting behind it. Because if you don't have that support, then it's just not going to go anywhere. And if you want to hear more about that, then I'd love to talk more about it. It's just a lot to talk about in the time we have. All right, so another kind of simple tip in a way. It can sound simple on its face, but it can be a bit difficult to achieve if you don't already have it. So, and that's an open line of communication. So, for example, if I'm on a team and the manager of that team is very kind of standoffish and they're not really open to ideas and they don't really seem to care very much about the well-being of their employees, and you're not going to have very open line communication with that superior, and you're not going to feel comfortable to say, hey, I can't read that, or I need this accommodation, would you be able to repeat that, things like that. So having an open line of communications with your workers can really help alleviate a lot of that stress of having to ask for accommodations. So if I'm in an environment where I feel supported, then I don't mind at all raising my hand and asking for help. But if it's in an environment where I feel I'll be judged or whatever it may be, then I may not even ask for help. And so I'll just keep going, doing my work and struggling because I didn't feel comfortable enough to ask. But also what's good to keep in mind is don't always rely on your employees asking for accommodations. It can be a good habit to get into to offering accommodations. And you may not know exactly what those accommodations are, but just letting your employees know, hey everyone, if you need any accommodations, feel free to reach out to me individually. Things like that, that can really be helpful. And when people hear that, it can trigger in their mind, okay, it is okay for me to ask, and it can create a lot more comfortable environment for them to ask for help. Because again, like I said, 70 to 80% of disabilities are hidden, and about half of people with disabilities have not disclosed it. And I think a big part of that is because people are worried they're going to be treated differently. So if management takes the first step and says, hey, everyone, if you need help, here's the step you can take to get it. So if you take that first step as management, it can make it much easier down the road.
Taylor, that I just have to say that makes me think about how very important your information is for anyone in management or C-suite. It's so important for leadership to take ownership of that and to open that line of communication.
Yeah, and it's again, it's a simple sounding one, but if you don't have one, having open line of communication could be hard to kind of create that environment. So it's
Yep,
ideal if you already have that kind of relationship with your team. But
definitely.
if you don't, then that's certainly something I would say probably the first thing you want to work on. But then if you don't have that open line of communication, but even if you do, but especially if you don't, things like anonymous surveys can really be helpful. Because then if you send out anonymous surveys, then people don't have to worry about being honest and getting treated differently or judged. Because I think I was talking to someone at Microsoft and I was telling them this, and they were like, "Oh, we actually do that here." I'm like, "Oh, that's fantastic." It wasn't surprising because I've heard a lot of great things about Microsoft and their internal and external accessibility, but just found it very interesting. But having these anonymous surveys can really make sure you're getting the best information back. And I know a lot of us work with data on a daily basis, and we all know the more accurate the data is, the better insights we get, and the more easy it is to fix problems. And also, that's a great anonymous surveys are a great piece of an accessibility maturity model. And it's good to assess your current level of accessibility, but also it's helpful to send it out every now and then to kind of reassess how things are progressing. So if you do one survey and identify areas that need to be improved, make some changes, it's good to send one out a few months or 6 months later to evaluate the progress. This is another very simple one, but it can be a little tricky, and that's people first language. So a quick example, like I prefer to be referred to as Taylor or person with blindness and not a blind guy or a blind person, because the disability does not define the person. Like as I showed you in the intro slide, I have a lot of interest. There's a lot more to me than my blindness, and that's similar to almost everyone, but especially keep in mind with those people with disabilities, we're all just people, so there's no reason to identify people by their disability. And the same for their race or sexual orientation, things like that. And this is something that even I catch myself making the mistake of not using person first language. It hasn't happened in a while for me. It used to happen every now and then. And have to constantly be policing myself not to do that, but you're as long as you're making the effort, that's the important part. Everyone's going to make mistakes, even people like me who talk about this stuff all the time. We're all going to make mistakes, but it's just important to recognize your mistakes and just try and make them less frequent.
Taylor, you got a heart from Kristen on that one, and I want to second that with her. And I applaud you for being honest about the fact that even you strive for that. So very, very nice.
Yeah, and like I said at the beginning, accessibility is extremely broad. Like I consider myself an expert, but that does not mean I know everything. I don't think I ever
Absolutely.
will. It
Yeah.
is there's so and it's ever changing too. The guidelines are constantly being shifted. Like it's not always the biggest shift, but even the smallest shift can still make you wrong. So,
Yep. Absolutely.
and that's why it's always good to have to stay up to date on these kinds of things because these things do change. And I've tried to get better at being a little bit more on top of that on LinkedIn, like keeping people up to date on those kinds of things. And this is one I I think I like the most because it applies the most to me. That's introducing yourself. This applies greatly to people with visual disabilities. For example, I go to a lot of conferences, and so I do a lot of networking events, and I'll have a lot of people who recognize me from earlier in the conference at a session or just at a different event or on LinkedIn, and they'll come up and say hi, and then I feel really bad and embarrassed because I don't recognize them, and I don't know if this is someone who I've never met, but they just know me from a session or whatever it may be, or if it's someone I've known for years and I just don't recognize their voice. So it's really helpful when people introduce themselves when they first interact with me. That way I know right away who I'm talking to. And this can be a little tricky. It can be a little awkward, especially if you're not used to it. But it's something that can make people feel a lot more included. Like, and with visual disabilities, there are so many different ones and varying levels of blindness. And I haven't made a post about it yet, but I recently learned that around 85 to 90% of people with blindness still have some functional vision. So I just found that very interesting. But yeah, introducing yourself, it's something simple that can make a huge difference. All right, and accessible introductions. This is something great to keep in mind at like the start of a meeting, especially with people you don't normally interact with, or at the start of a session. Giving a brief visual description of who you are. Like if I were to give one, I would say, "Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor. Today I am a straight white male. Today I'm wearing a mustard colored t-shirt with a silver chain and kind of casual today." And so like giving those accessible introductions can really help people with visual impairments feel more included. Just to just to make you feel better about uh kind of knowing who the speaker is, what they look like, what they're wearing, those kinds of things. Again, just trying to create an equal experience for others.
Hey Taylor, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to tell you we're at about like a 3 minute warning.
Oh, no
And
worries.
yeah, so I just want to let you know.
Perfect timing. So if anyone has any questions, and that's QR code of my LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you and talk more if you have any more questions you forget about on here or just want to connect on there.
Wonderful. Taylor, can I throw out to you now some of the questions that folks have asked?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right, this is from Emily, and I know Emily, she's a small business owner and she makes really incredible products. So she says, as a small product business, I mainly sell from my website. I try to make sure my images have accessibility descriptions for the vision impaired, but sometimes it's easy to forget to do them when I'm busy. I've always wondered how much they're used and never had anyone to ask. Are these helpful for you? Also, is there any other thing I can do to boost accessibility on a website?
That's a great question, Emily. So, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of everyone who uses screen readers, but for me personally, I love when an image has an all text description because, again, it's creating that equal experience for everyone. So, since I can't visually see what the image is, but I can still hear it. And you don't necessarily always have to have one, but it's essential to have it when the image is very pertinent to the information on the page. So if it's like an informative image or like a symbolic image or it's a chart or a graph, then that's like a need to have. But I would say a large majority of people with visual impairments get a lot of great use of having listening to all text descriptions. And I can speak from personal experience whenever I interact with a product or a web page that has those in place, then it makes me think more like more highly about that company because they gave that thought. And if you want to make your website even more accessible, it's certainly a bit challenging, but there is something called the WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they have three different levels of standards: single A, double A, and triple A. And most both legal compliances with AA standards. And so if you ever have any questions on how to make your stuff compliant with that, then you can refer to that. But also using AI like Copilot can be very
Mm,
helpful.
that's a
Like
great
if
point.
you have something on your screen, say, hey, I have this image. How do I make sure it's AA compliant with the WCAG? And a lot of laws are built off of the WCAG, AA standards. So if you're compliant with those, you basically eliminate all legal risk.
That's fantastic. So that
Apologies for my voice.
Oh yeah, no worries. By the way, Emily also gave you kudos. She said you've given so much or so many great suggestions and thoughts to keep in mind for both employees and customers. So thank you. And she's going to read up on the AA standards. And then that led though to a little bit more question. So Kristen had said to expand on what Emily asked, can you tell us how alt text helps when posted photos, example to LinkedIn? But then that led to the other question of you're saying listening. So is the alt text generally read back with your screen reader?
Yeah, so the alt text description is not going to be visible to the user just looking at the web page.
Okay.
I think I may have caught it. I don't know. This one fly keeps flying right in my face. But so like when I use the screen reader, whether it's on my phone or on my computer, and it interacts with that image, then if it has an alt text description, it will then read that description, which is just describing what that picture is. And so that's something you have to do in your code, like your HTML code. You can also like on if you're posting a picture on LinkedIn, they make it very easy. When you go to edit your image, you'll see an alt symbol down at the bottom. If you click that, it gives you a text box that you can put in your alt text description.
That's
And again,
great.
if you're curious on how to best write an alt text description, then you can utilize Copilot or ChatGPT, whichever you prefer. I usually prefer to make mine 2 to 3 sentences. And if you ever want to test the effectiveness, what you can do is close your eyes and have it read aloud to you and make sure you're able to picture what that image is.
That's
It can be
great.
even more helpful if you have someone else do it for you.
That's incredible. What a great use of AI. And Kristen just said, she said that is very helpful to know. So thank you. One last question for you, Taylor. How do you recommend addressing invisible or unknown disabilities in accessibility planning?
You mean specifically with like in the workplace?
Yes. So in the workplace, let's say you're an employer, you said it yourself. A lot of folks don't always offer up that they have a disability. Um, and so what would you say is your best recommend? I kind of think I know what you're going to say because you spoke to it a bit, but what would you say now?
Yeah, so the open line communication, having management like let their employees know about accommodations that are available to them, because also some employees may not even think about it. They may not really think to ask for it, but if they get prompted, like, oh, wait, I could use that. But also the anonymous surveys, if you hear back from your surveys and see, all right, we have a lot of people struggling with this and we should make sure we address that. That could be very important too. But yeah, but also when it comes like interacting with people with hidden disabilities, I know it may sound weird to assume everyone does have a disability, but just making your interactions more accessible, like having more accessible communication, like how I was using Bobby as an example on constantly asking questions on how to get better and put those into practice on using more inclusive language. So things like that can really be helpful, especially when you don't know if someone has a disability or not.
That makes sense. That's fabulous. Well, Taylor, I cannot thank you enough. We've gone over time a little bit here, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I just cannot thank you enough. Please know that the work you're doing is very important. We at Mount Evans Consulting are absolutely thrilled to have hosted you and would love to do so again. And I want to thank you for your passionate evangelism on behalf of those in need of accessibility. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and thank you and Kristen for having me on here. I love talking about accessibility, and so it's great to have people giving me opportunities, so I'm not just talking to myself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you next month in Chicago. And we'll definitely be seeking additional opportunities to host you. So thanks again, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. All right, bye
Thank,
everyone.
thank you, everybody. Bye bye.